All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It is 8:06 in the AM. It is Tuesday, February 11th, and we are here for our latest Energy for All Alaska Task Force. Our subject this morning is air quality, much in the news here in Fairbanks in the last several weeks. We do have some guests to discuss air quality, both regulation, but also the resources to help us improve our air quality, both on a community-wide, but also on an individual household basis. So our guests today are Mr. Nick Czarnecki of the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation. We have Mr. Stephen Hoke, the director of our local Air Quality Division. We also have Mr. Jason Olds, who I believe is the division director for the state's Air Quality Division. And so without further ado, except for one further comment, as always, guys and ladies, again, this is for our mutual benefit. So as we move through the presentation discussion, if you have any comments, if you have any questions, I'm trying to monitor the chat box. I'm trying to manage or monitor the participant list for hands, but you can always just go ahead and take yourself off mute and fire away. Again, we're all old friends here, and this is a subject of has been long running concern. All right, so without further ado, I will hand it over to the assemblage. Good morning, everybody. So who wants to go first? I heard we do have a presentation or some slides. Nick, you want me to make you a co-host?
Sure. And I can, state of Alaska can go ahead and go first, and then Steve, you can take the next slot after that. So I will go ahead and share screen. All right. Jomo, can you see the title slide of the presentation?
Yes, sir. Fairbanks SIP update.
All right, fantastic. So first of all, Nick Czarnecki, and I am a program manager with DEC here at the state of Alaska. Work in air quality and have been working on the Fairbanks issue for many years, since 2017 in various capacities. So always appreciate the chance to come out and talk to folks and provide an update. So thanks, Jomo, for the invitation.
Thanks for taking it.
And so in this presentation, we're going to go over some timelines, some of the work completed. I'm going to highlight some of the important modifications of the SIP, talk about wood stoves, and then leave some time for questions. And as usual, if there's questions during the presentation, I can just raise your hand or talk, and I can take them during the presentation or afterwards. So this is not an all-inclusive timeline, but this starts back in 2023 when EPA proposed partial approval and partial disapproval of the SIP. So 23 to 24, we had a lot of work. We did some comments. The community came out and submitted some great comments. And then in January of 2024, we had the official, partial disapproval. This is the piece that started the penalties. The sanction clock started, and we had 18 months until the 2-to-1 offsets, 24 months to the highway sanctions. And we also got into the transportation conformity freeze, which is a penalty that's kind of hurting the transportation sector. And so we've been hard at work. In March 24, we published draft regulations. We had the comment period closed for that in May. And we brought the SIP out for public comment in late 2024. We got that to EPA in November of 24. EPA did an amazingly quick job of reviewing and proposing full approval. And so I still have this timeline split out into two pieces because this is something that I've talked about in other presentations. And I just wanted to keep it that way because depending on what EPA proposed, that told us which path we were going down. Luckily, we're on this upper path where they proposed full approval, and so we can start to lift the conformity freeze and we avoid those penalties. If EPA had proposed a partial approval and partial disapproval, so even one element of the SIP was disapproved, then we would have been down on this lower timeline. Conformity freeze would not be starting to be lifted, would have 2-to-1 offsets in June, highway sanctions in January, and then EPA would propose a FIP. And so it's really good news that we're on that upper timeline. And so how did we avoid sanctions in a FIP up to this point? It was not easy. It is a monumental lift of a lot of paperwork. Back in 2023, the proposed disapprove elements are up here on the screen. We have point source SO2 controls. We didn't meet BACM. We didn't have the PM controls in for all of the permits. We didn't have sufficient contingency measures. The BACM, there were this whole list of control measures that EPA disapproved. It was ULSD, requirements for wood cellars, coffee roasters, char broilers, used oil burners, weatherization, light duty vehicle idling, heavy duty vehicle idling, other transportation measures. Because we had all of these disapproval pieces in these two columns, our attainment year, attainment demonstration, reasonable further progress, motor vehicle emission budget, and quantitative milestones were also not approvable. So these are all the pieces of the SIP that were not approvable. And our job over the course of a year was to get every single one of them. And it was an all or nothing. We had to get all of them to avoid the sanctions. So what we did is we were able to successfully dismiss ULSD, char broilers, used oil burners, heavy duty vehicle idling, and other transportation measures with our first round of comments by providing additional information. So we got those off the list. We were able to, in March of 2024, we addressed the deficiencies with weatherization, coffee roasters, coal-fired heating, and wood cellars with new regulations. These were things that we could not dismiss through comments or the SIP update. And then it was a really, really monumental effort, but we were able to update the modeling platform. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. That allowed us to do a precursor for point source SO2 controls. We had to do a huge lift internally to get permits issued for the PM controls to meet that part, and then did a lot of writing on the contingency measures to get that piece. Because we took care of all those, we got all of these over here, and we have a proposed approval. And so that's what EPA is doing right now with their action. Yes, Jomo.
Can we go back to the last slide? If it's not too bad of a digression, can we just, can you tell me a little bit about weatherization? What was the hiccup and what was the solution?
Yeah, so weatherization, BACM are the best available control measures. And so we have to go out and review and look at everything that's done in the country and in other non-attainment areas. And we have to adopt the most stringent requirement. And with BACM, it doesn't matter how much it helps us get to attainment. If there's emission reductions, we have to adopt it. The only off-ramps through the BACM are technical infeasibility, economic infeasibility, and timing constraints. And so those are the ways we can do it. It was disapproved because we had dismissed weatherization as technically infeasible because we said the state didn't have the authority to implement it. EPA commented back to us in the BACM process and said, actually, if you don't have the authority to implement it, then you don't have an air quality program that's required under the Clean Air Act. You have to have that authority. So you do have the authority to implement it. So we went back and looked at it. They pointed to a couple of things. They said you need to look at adopting building codes throughout the area. You need to look at some of these weatherization measures that require updates to properties whenever remodel is done. And you need to look at, some other components such as energy audits and education and outreach. And so we went through the whole process. We were able to successfully eliminate building codes and the requirements to actually do any updates like during remodels. But then we didn't really have any good off-ramp for the energy audits and the other regulations that we put into place because they would result in some emission reductions. And I can go through a little bit later on how we're getting there. But is that a good amount of historical context for that piece, Jomo?
I think so. So really what we would have been talking about, so this would be an example. You're about to change the windows. You have to now do all the siding.
Yeah, it'd be something like you're doing a remodel that's over a threshold, and you have to do insulation as well during that remodel, and you have to bring it up to, a certain energy rating. That's what we do not have written in.
Which would have been a challenge.
Yes, that was a challenge even back in the stakeholders group back in 2018.
Yeah, my recollection of the AHFC weatherization program, not weatherization, rather, the rebate program, I kind of considered it the bookend to the federally backed weatherization programs, where the one was taking care of truly indigent people, seniors and truly indigent people, but where the other was, in practice, kind of skewed towards the more affluent, because you'd be making an outlay based on a speculative level of return, if any return at all, and you had to be able to withstand that. Again, you can't make a $20,000 investment if you can't. It's gambling in Vegas. You may not actually get your money back or any portion of your money back. So you just had to be able to withstand that outlay. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think that's correct. And so where we're at right now is EPA in early January, I think it was January 7th or 8th, EPA proposed full approval on the SIP, which is great news for us because the full approval is what tolls the sanction clock and starts to lift the conformity freeze. And so the public comment period on that full proposed approval closed on February 7th. One thing to note is that this is a good thing for the community, is that we're going to get those penalties lifted with this full approval. There is some community feedback on the weatherization piece. We're hearing from the realtors, and so is Region 10. So even though this public comment is closed, Region 10 is verbally committed to reopen a portion of the proposed approval for additional public comment. I don't know specifically what that looks like. And they will not reopen the transportation budget during that additional public comment, so that the conformity freeze can continue to be lifted along its current timeline, because we really didn't want to slow that process down at all. I know that's a pain point for fast planning and some of the transportation projects around town.
So I'm going to flaunt my ignorance, and anyone else can do same. What is the conformity freeze?
The conformity freeze is one of the penalties in the Clean Air Act, and that's the first one that was implemented. What it does is it within fast planning and DOT and the state transportation plan, there's funding allocations that are determined in advance, and it freezes those funding allocations. So some of the ongoing projects and some of the projects, when they start to incur cost overruns, FAST and DOT are no longer able to move money into those projects. It's more nuanced than that, but basically what it does is it freezes the funding so that you can't move it around anymore, and it's been a pain point for the transportation folks.
So not a freeze on money coming in, but really a no change requirement relative to the stuff that's already in process.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
And so just knowing how much time we have, I'm going to kind of skim through this stuff. But some of the really big changes in a lot of the work that we did, we updated the emission inventory from base year 2013 to 2020. This was a really big part of the foundation of the analysis. We did new survey results in 2023 to add to our survey on how we calculate these emissions. We had some of the new major stationary sources, like the new coal-fired boiler UAF that came online in there, and that was reflected in there. And we also did some kind of control inventory updates and projected a realistic implementation and compliance rates, which I'll get to later. That was a lot of work. The emission inventory is then the foundation for doing all the analysis. And another big chunk that we had to update was the CMAQ modeling. And here you can see in the bullet points that there's a whole lot of technical pieces to this model that were updated. This represents years worth of work and involves not just, PhD atmospheric scientists from, the state of Alaska, but also from UAF, international scientists, scientists in EPA's RARE grant. And in fact, we are one of our DEC folks, D. Huff, who was instrumental in getting this CMAQ modeling update, is going over to London to present at the Faraday conference on an international level on updating the atmospheric chemistry in Arctic environments. And so this is, I just can't say how amazing this work was, and that it's something that's getting international recognition, is the work that's done on the modeling, and that allows us, better tool for planning. So it's a really good thing. And so with that new emission inventory and that new modeling, one of the things we were able to do is to get the major stationary sources, an SO2 precursor analysis. This is where we actually went through and said, hey, if you were to require controls and, on the SO2 emissions from the electric utilities, what is the benefit that you would actually see at the monitor? And what we saw was that the best case scenario was that if we eliminated all of the SO2 from the electric utilities, we would only see a difference of 0.21 micrograms per meter cubed in the actual monitored level. And so that tells us that we would have to spend a whole lot of money, and we wouldn't get very much return on our investment, because when you see a little bit later on, we have to get from, 50, 60 down to 35. So if you're only going to get 0.21 for all of that contribution, it doesn't make sense. That's why we were able to do that analysis and take those expensive controls out of play in this piece. Some new controls for the residential sector. I knew that folks wanted to talk about this, and so this is where, I already went through a lot of this slide. EPA wanted building codes and mandatory updates at time of remodel. Where we ended up with weatherization. We've got kind of two components of this. When they went into effect, so December 2024, real estate agents now have a defined role in ensuring compliance with some of the air quality regulations, specifically with registering wood stoves at time of home sale, and with ensuring that we get date certain removal of uncertified devices. And so these are going to result in, emission reductions starting right off the bat. And then in 2025, we have energy ratings. These are going to provide an energy audit. And this energy audit is, just another piece of information that is helpful to, both buyers and sellers when they're looking at potential properties. And when it's provided to DEC, it'll help us update our inventory for home heating appliances, feeds into that emission inventory. And it'll also be an automatic register for wood heating appliances, so that we can really work on getting those emissions down in that source sector. We do have an FAQ page that is here, and Joe will send this presentation out to you, and so that folks can see that. I see there's a hand up, Mike Kraft.
Thanks, Nick. Hey, on these energy audits, we've been talking about this for about a week now, and is there any attempt at all to shore up the availability of energy audit performers in the interior? It just reminds me of the situation we ran into with appraisers here a couple of years ago, where you had a lot of transactions that were in process that were not being able to move along because there was a shortage of appraisers at the time. And so I'm just curious if there's any attempt at all, either by the borough or the state, to entice other individuals to be able to perform these energy audits at Fairbanks.
Well, Mike, more pointedly, when they first implemented that AHFC rebate program, which required 2 energy audits, that was one of the major bottlenecks right on the front end, was the fact that there weren't auditors, the people that actually had the equipment to be able to perform the service. I also see Mr. Hoke's hand up. So yeah, I'll have at it, gentlemen.
Yeah, well, I can take a quick shot to address pretty quickly Mike's question, then we can jump over to Steve. And so, absolutely, there is going to be outreach, and that's what we have the remainder of the year to do is to work on these implementation issues. We've definitely heard that that's a concern from multiple folks. Um, when we were looking at this regulation, we did discuss and reached out to AHFC and found that there were 4 current energy raters that were in the Fairbanks area. I'm actually going over to AHFC later today for another presentation on this subject, and we're going to, actively work with them on seeing what can be done to increase the number of energy raters for the area. And the other piece is, while we have the rest of this year to look at these potential implementation issues, we also do have discretion, authority, and administratively, if there's going to be a bottleneck, then we can look at things that can be done administratively to ensure that there is no bottleneck when this actually gets implemented next year, because that's definitely not something that we want to hamper. We don't want to hamper the speed that a sale can happen. So we'll be working with all stakeholders to try to make sure that that bottleneck does not exist.
One other quick question on the subject is there any methodology for establishing some kind of value with respect to what homeowners and property people that are working in that industry can expect to have to pay for one of these energy audits?
Our preliminary look, and keep in mind that we did not do a full economic feasibility analysis in this because we adopted it and it wasn't required to do. But our initial looks were about $500 to $600 for an energy auditor. I know that we're seeing some other numbers being thrown out around there, so that's something that we'll just have to, get a sharper pencil and figure out what the actual number is this year.
Alrighty, thank you.
Mr.
Right.
Hope? Oh, and I see Lisa just threw her hand up as well.
Yeah, Nick, you mentioned the date certain removal. Can you go into that a little bit and just explain it so everybody's clear on what that means?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so date certain removal of uncertified appliances, we have 2 categories. Ones that are appliances that have not been certified ever by EPA. These include barrel stoves, wood stoves that were manufactured before 1988, and other stoves. These appliances had to be removed from houses by December 31st, 2024. And there was also a requirement that those appliances got removed before that date during any real estate transaction. They were not supposed to convey with the existing sale. And there's also another component where if stoves are over 2 grams per hour, EPA certified, and greater than 25 years old, then those stoves are required to be removed. And so these are 25-year-old stoves, the older ones that have hit their useful life that are probably emitting more, also have to be removed. And that's a really big area that we are counting on those emission reductions in order to, achieve attainment by 2027. And also, there is the borough's changeout program, which Steve is going to talk about, that has an incentive to change those out. Now that we're past that date, there are some pieces that we have to do administratively, and not everybody is going to be able to take advantage of that incentive. But those are, again, that's a requirement that we're really relying on heavily to reach attainment, because it gets the dirtiest appliances out of the airshed.
But you couch this under responsibility of realtors, and I'm wondering how I can understand if it might be their responsibility to identify and report, but you almost made it sound like it's also it's their responsibility to see that it is removed. How does that work?
Yeah, and if I had that, I did not intend that to be the case, Jomo. It's definitely not the realtor's responsibility. The real estate professionals must inform buyers and sellers of their obligations, and the agents are not responsible for enforcement, but they must ensure that their compliance understand and comply with the rules. And so there is provisions in there that as long as they, as long as they fulfill those obligations, that real estate agents are not liable and are not responsible for compliance.
Okay. It's like a doctor can be required to inform you that you have cancer, but can't be held responsible or liable if you refuse to go do the treatment. Okay. Lisa?
Yeah, sorry, I have a couple of questions related to this, and there's a great I'll just also make a comment that there's a great workforce opportunity, development opportunity here, because it seems that energy raters, energy auditors are, being mentioned in a lot of different related sectors, and the need is there, though the availability is not, though I guess AHFC has brought on a few more folks, not many in the Fairbanks area. But I had a couple comments, and one is if there's a way, like if folks just do, if this is only being, I'm going to figure out how to mention this, but if this is only in the non-attainment area, correct? Where this will be a requirement. Okay, and then the other is, for those who do sales without realtors, would that be a loophole for folks to sort of get around this? Or are there other agents, like, when you're doing a sale, you'd have to deal with different levels of, the sale process, but you don't have to include a realtor. So I was just sort of wondering about that. And then the other part is, and I live outside the non-attainment area, and I have had an energy audit. I should say that already. But so I'm not asking these questions to get around this myself. But and then the other is, there's the requirement for the audit, but is there a requirement for doing anything to remedy any issues that might arise through the audit?
Yeah, so let's see if I can remember all of the questions here. And so the first one is, or I'll do the last one that you did, is there a requirement to do anything in result of the audit? No, there's no requirement to do anything as a result of the audit. The audit is there to inform the buyer and seller and to hopefully give them more information on, what can be done to increase the efficiency of the home. The emission reductions come in the form of increased compliance with the date certain removal that I talked about, and also with registration, which leads to registration of wood stoves, which leads to increased compliance with the curtailment program. And so we're basically getting the information from that energy audit, and that will lead to the emission reductions. So right now there is no mandatory update at the time of remodel. And then your other question had to deal with the kind of implementation and enforcement, and is there a loophole if somebody doesn't use a realtor? And legally, there is no loophole if you don't use a realtor, because these requirements are required at the time of home sale, regardless of whether or not an agent is used. But most home sales do use an agent and a real estate agent. And if we are looking at, trying to really increase compliance across this sector, that's a way that we can do it there. And, there is absolutely provisions that we can look at for sales that are done outside of real estate agents, for sale by owners, and would be willing to work with those folks just the same that we would a realtor.
Great, thank you. I mean, I think it's our weatherization is great. I know folks are freaking out about the potential cost and sort of that hurdle, but thank you.
Elena?
Thank you. Good morning. Elena Saret, Interior Gas Utility. Thank you, Nick, for your presentation. I have a question that's about something different that you said, not the audits. So it is my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the enforcement mechanism, the first enforcement mechanism that EPA has is this conformity freezes that are related to transportation funding, and that is because elsewhere, or most other places that don't meet air quality standards, that is related to vehicle emissions, and that's how it makes logical sense. There is a movement in the community to potentially ask EPA to make an exception for Fairbanks, because vehicle emissions are not the main reason that we're having these issues. And as I was listening to that, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. But what would EPA do in return? Because they're not going to turn around and say, okay, Alaska, then there's no punishment for you. And you mentioned earlier that the conformity freezes are kind of like step one. What other steps are there?
Yeah, so let's see the penalties and the steps. Conformity freeze happens immediately on disapproval, and then the sanction clock starts. So the next step is 2-to-1 offsets for industrial facilities. And so anything, like any of the power plants or any other facility that would emit at major levels would have to offset and find 2 tons of emission reduction for every ton that they want permitted. So it hits industrial facilities at a permitting level. So that's a non-transportation penalty. And then you have the freezing of highway funds, which actually stops the highway funds from coming into the area. I think those were estimated at around 50 million a year annually. And then the kind of final penalty is that if the deficiencies aren't resolved, then EPA comes in and writes their own federal implementation plan instead of a state implementation plan. So they take the decision making out of the state and local hands and take it into the federal government. And so that's the kind of stepwise function of the penalties. And I definitely have heard the community and heard Jackson, Fox, and folks at FAST talk about it. And yeah, I mean, in this case, transportation is not an issue. But those penalties are not at EPA's discretion. Those penalties are specifically called out in the Clean Air Act, and so they're part of U.S. statute. And so EPA doesn't have the discretion to change those. That would be an act of Congress. And I see that Jason has his hand up, so I'll let him jump in here too.
Yeah, and in the last couple of years, actually, there was a letter from Jackson, Fox, and the FAST Policy Board to the regional administrator requesting that, and it was denied for the reasons Nick's discussing.
Thank you for that context.
Nick, I have a follow-up on that, these audits. I want to make sure I understand this. So what I thought I heard you say was that these audits would be required, but any findings related to the audit would not be action items required by either the seller or the buyer. So am I missing something there?
No, you're correct. There's no, there's no required action after the audit. This is just to get the energy audit so that the buyer and sellers have more information, and then it's provided to DEC. That gives us inventory for wood heating. We also register wood stoves at that time, and then we'll get our emission reductions through increased compliance rate of other control measures. And Jason, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I just contextualizing this a bit more too, because where Nick had presented early on the timelines that we were on and sort of how we got here, I just want to reiterate that this wasn't initially a measure that we included. And then this was sort of the compromise position from having to do weatherization or building codes. And so it was not a part of our initial submission. It was something that EPA noted through the administrative record that was required to make this approvable. We understand sort of the perspectives around what this is good for and sort of questioning that. And, we encourage folks to comment to EPA as well in that sort of secondary period if they open that. I know that the current comment period had just closed, and so we're waiting to see as they sort of consider that any new comments that might be received. And it was a part of our comments to EPA as well, that we think without some of the sort of weatherization funding from grants or parts of the Inflation Reduction Act to sort of back these things up, that it doesn't necessarily get the same reductions that may be intended. However, it does help our compliance efforts, and we do anticipate that we'll still see reductions from it. We are watching this closely.
Is there any way that, I mean, I'm just kind of a little bit disappointed that we're going to spend anywhere between $500 and $1,000 during a transaction for an item that really doesn't require any action by the seller or the buyer. And I'm just wondering if there's a way to kind of give that some value to the purchaser or the seller in the form of, okay, well, this is what we think you can do to better this house, and maybe even make it possible to use that as a mechanism for the potential buyer to get some kind of funding to improve the property based on those findings. I mean, it just seems like we're spinning our wheel there if we're not getting anything out of it.
Hey,
Yeah.
it sounds like there is a minimum requirement, and that is if a inappropriate heating device is identified, it will need to be removed. Correct?
Yeah, correct. And I agree. Mike has some really good points there. And the intent of this again is that the energy audit, we're going to work with AHFC, and there's an outreach and education component too. And so the energy audit will be coupled with that education and outreach. And if AHFC or another entity has some grant money or other funding available that can help with weatherization, then we'll do everything we can to get this energy audit as the first step to applying for those programs and doing things. The state's position is that we're just stopping and doing that at voluntary at this point. We're not going to mandate anything. And then really quick, Jomo, you are correct, because with the wood stoves, there is right now an incentive. Steve can go to that, and I know we're getting short on time, so anytime that we have to cut this off and get over to Steve to talk about the incentives that are available, for removing a wood stove now, I think the borough has increased their incentive to $10,000 a stove. These are real economic incentives that can be, taken advantage of at the time of home sale, and, rolled in with financing that folks are doing, and potentially using this energy audit and making some really, really good improvements.
But at this
Hey,
point,
Mike, I see you've taken yourself off mute, but I'd like to give another speaker a chance if they would like to. I do see Mr. Church has taken himself off mute.
Thank you, Jomo. A couple of things about the new 18 AAC 5081 real estate transaction requirements that I noticed reading through it, and a little bit about my background. I've been a realtor in the area for 9 years. I'm not here in that job today, but it is interesting that in this new regulation, there is no limit to how many times you need to get an energy rating. So a lot of times our Air Force and Army soldiers come up, do a year, do 2 years, end up selling the house to leave, which would require them, per this new regulation, to get a new energy rating every year, every other year, whenever they decide to leave. That can become very costly. I know it's an expense of doing business, and I am totally for the energy rating, but without any sort of proper language in there that speaks to that, it does leave it very open-ended and makes it look like it would be a per transaction, the way it's written now, type deal. And then also to speak to the realtor or agent in your new regulation here, it's an agent stating anyone who's involved with a buyer or seller. It doesn't necessarily say real estate agent. But it does say agent, and requires that agent to fulfill and ensure compliance with this regulation. Why couldn't that be done similar to the way the borough sends out their requests for what you actually sold your house for at the end of a transaction, and have that be done internally by DEC?
All right, so let's see. So the last one is why can't that be done internally, and why can't we just send out a request like the borough does? Is because those are really voluntary. When you get down to it, there's no actual mechanism that makes that a requirement for folks to send those back in. And these regulations have to be permanent and enforceable under the Clean Air Act if we're going to take credit for the emission reductions, which is what we're aiming to do in this. And we modeled the regulations off of things that are similar to lead paint, and worked them that way. And that's the way that we came up with them. And then the first piece with your question on whether or not there's a requirement if a house turns over, once every year, if a new energy audit is going to be required. And those are things where we have the rest of this year to look at implementation issues such as that. We're very open to engaging with stakeholders such as yourself and making this rule workable so that we can get it implemented. And I think we have the administrative discretion to waive requirements for homes that turn over frequently. So those are absolutely things that we'd like to discuss in the upcoming year.
And I'll double down and say we absolutely would have some sort of clause for sort of the repeat or unnecessary energy audits being waived.
Oh, Steve.
Yeah, I just want to jump in there real quick and just comment on that. The one downside of waiving or not, I guess, having this energy audit required upon sale, and this is something we see in the change out program a lot, is illegal installations of non-compliant wood stoves. And so you get people that come in that don't know the regulations, whether they be military or otherwise, and they install a device, to supplement the heat of their home, but it doesn't meet state requirements, or it's a barrel stove, or whatever the case may be. And sometimes the only way to catch that is through, regulations like Nick's, like the state is proposing here.
So I'll about two things, if I may. The first is, now I can see it on a longer term time horizon. Again, this is setting up what is probably a beneficial market trigger. When we were working on our housing task force, we didn't have building codes, so we couldn't force better building, but we ended up putting together a booklet that told the market, the buyer, what to look for an more energy efficient and therefore cheaper to operate residence. So again, we didn't try to make requirements of the builder. We didn't try to make requirements of the realtor. It was, again, setting up a positive market trigger. People would know to look for more energy efficient properties. And so I can see if, energy audits become a thing before sale, you'll have that market trigger. People will know the energy efficiency of this structure, and they can compare them for other structures they might potentially be purchasing. Again, bang for buck and lowest operating costs. Secondarily, though, and I think just more directly, when they first implemented the program at AHFC, again, the bottleneck was energy raters, and the four things energy raters needed was blower door equipment, a laptop, the ActWarm software, and then training on how to synthesize all of those. And so if we wanted to try to encourage market entry, I thought about at the time purchasing several sets of the blower door equipment that I could rent out to energy raters, because that was one of the bottlenecks, was the cost of getting that blower door equipment on the front end. But I don't know, we may consider getting some of that equipment that might be made available to potential future energy raters, lowering their burden for market entry and therefore increasing the number of those who could perform the service. But Nick, yeah, we're moving through the hour.
I was going to say, we're at 10 minutes before the hour, and I know that Steve had some stuff to talk about with the borough. And so, Steve, I apologize for taking up a bunch of time. Do you want to just jump in right now, or should I talk about like how we're reaching attainment? What do you think?
I'd like to hear how we're reaching attainment. Do we look like we're on track?
Yeah, Nick, how many slides you got left? If you can knock her out in 5 minutes, I can do a quick overview of the program and just,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so I will do just the quick attainment piece is where we're sitting right now. Here's the historical, timeline, the design value. This kind of yellow gold line is what we need to bring down to this red line. You can see we started up near 140 back in 2014. We plateaued, but we are starting to come down again. This year's numbers, it looks like we're going to be just above 50 for 2023. So we are making progress. That fancy model that I talked about, that amazing work that D Huff and others have done, our starting point is 64.9 with these years 2017 through 2021. If we model out to 2026 using our control strategy, we only hit 38.1. So we don't hit that standard of 35, but then in 2027 we hit 31.9. And so what does it look like to get there? Keep in mind also that this is not controlling SO2 because that would only give us that 0.21, which is really negligible. But how we get there, the red line is space heating, and so this is no further control. This is our primary source of pollution, so this is what we're really focused on. We're going to get most of our reductions from the wood stove changeout program by 2027. That's we're relying on the borough and the excellent work that Steve does. Curtailment, we're going to get a decent bit, not a ton, but we're holding that steady right now. And then the other DEC measures, which include the uncertified wood and coal device removal, wood device emission rates, commercial dry wood heating requirements. The weatherization stuff is baked into this piece right here. We're going to get 0.29 tons per day, and that will get us to attainment in 2027. I will add with the caveat that red line up there is based on wood stoves that emit at this blue level right here. And we know that there's an issue with wood stoves in the certification program that they do not emit at that level. And we're still working very diligently to try to solve that piece. But that's where we sit for getting to attainment in 2027. If we don't reach attainment in 2027, there are contingency measures. Those are in the SIP. They're basically lowering the stage alerts for the curtailment program and adding increased enforcement and compliance that will net us the emission reductions that we need. And so with that,
What's that last one though? USLD contingent or pellet stove or pellet only?
We dismissed those.
Yeah,
but yeah, I got those out of the equation.
Okay, because that would be the broadest potentially negative impact on the community economy, is having to switch to what is in fact a appreciably higher cost liquid fuel.
Yep, and that has been dismissed. So even if we do not reach attainment, we're not going to have to do that at this point. These are the measures that will be triggered automatically if we don't reach attainment.
Yeah, if we want more wood burning, that'll be a great way to get there.
We completely agree, and that's why it's not in there.
As I told the EPA candidly when he was here in Fairbanks. All right, Mr. Hoke, please. Because it's nice when the sticks do come with carrots.
Yeah, I'll just jam through this real quick. So the Fairbanks North Star Borough Air Quality Program obviously operates the changeout program, which does wood stoves, pellet stoves, to gas, oil, energy backups, lots of fun stuff. Here's a quick list of everything we do with the different grants we have. Everything from emergency power backups to straight removals, which we offer cash incentive for. So as we might already know, we increased the cash incentives in 2020, the end of 2023 through 24 for the removals. So now for a coal or wood removal, you get $10,000. And for a coal or wood pellet hydronic heater, you get $14,000, which is the same as our gas incentive for those devices. We still have about $12.2 million left spread out amongst a couple different tag grants there, hoping to get more once the feds figure out what they're doing. We've spent about $23.8 million over the course of this program in federal funding and state funding and local funding. Our previous year of 2024 ended with 511 changeouts, just a little bit shy of what we got last year, which was 696, but we think some of those 696 were holdouts from 2022 at the end of the year. There, we had a lot come through in January 2023. So the program has been performing wonderfully. The increase in removal incentive drove more removals overall. We went from 33 in 2023 up to 134 in 2024, which is the most removals since 2012. Our quarters are tracking, it's just the way it progresses. We're kind of right on point for what we were projecting. We get some peaks and some dips, but still pushing forward, hoping to get as many change outs as possible so we can meet the state's estimation of what we're removing from the area. They set some lofty goals, so we're hoping we can continue this up through 2027 and just keep on attaining exactly what we've projected through SIP.
Mr. Hoke, can you go back to the last slide, please? Next one back. One more back. Looks like we had a bit of a drop off on the yellow and blues applications and corrected changeouts.
Yeah.
And actual changeouts.
Yeah, so we project that as we get higher numbers, there'll be a drop off in the following quarter. You can't expect, so this is quarterly. So you can't expect throughout the year that you're going to continue to get, if you get, let's say, over there, you can see the blue line as it goes here. We got about 300 applications in quarter 324. You're not going to get 300 applications every quarter. So there's going to be some ups and some downs as we go through that, and as we continue to advertise and go through our cycle of advertising, we'll see ups and downs.
Okay, but it looks like the trend line is up. Ms. Bariff.
Yeah, I had a question that was semi-related, but with an earlier graph that showed there was a big drop off. Like, I forget when that was, like, yeah, that one, and then it went back up again. And I can imagine lots of different factors, from funding availability to more people perhaps getting hooked up to natural gas to whatever. But can you speak to, like, why this dropped off, and then why it's, and then the subsequent increase again?
Yeah. So this green line here is conversions, which includes oil, gas, electric, and energy backup. And as you can see, it just kind of trends down and then jumps back up year to year. So from 2022 to 23, we had a huge increase in gas conversions, and that was due to the gas, oil to gas funding provided both by the state, local, and also federal grants that included that. And so as that funding came in, there was some backlog because some other local funding had ran out. So you get this huge spike because all the funding comes in, we have applications waiting. And then as we get all those done, it dips back down because we didn't have those applications waiting in the background. They're dealing with them as they come in. Also, with the increase in the removal incentive there from 23 to 24, you see that orange line kind of jut up there above 100, and some of that is shifting from the change out to gas because the incentive is the same. So instead of going to gas, maybe somebody decides to take the $10,000 cash and figure out something else for themselves.
Thanks.
We also run a community monitoring program. I'm not going to get too much into that, but things are going good there. We're always looking for new sites to throw up purple air monitors so the community can be more aware of what's going on around them. This is not only good during the winter to see what their air quality is like, but also during the summer, during the those fire smoke seasons, so you can see if you want kids out there playing soccer. So as for general news and updates, we got our advertising campaign continuing for our program over web, TV, and radio. Mailers have been sent out at the end of the year last year to kind of cue everybody into the date certain removal. We got another mailer going out here pretty soon. We've had pretty good response with those mailers, so we're going to keep sending those out within the non-attainment area. Other than that, we're waiting for the announcement and application for the next tag grant, and we're hoping here in the next year to maybe get some increases to the incentives across the board to kind of compensate for the jumps in CPI that we've seen over the last few years. These incentives have not, aside from the removal incentive increase, the incentives have not been increased since 2016. So we're hoping to get a little spike there. And
Well,
that's
in my
about all I have.
anecdotal evidence, particularly regarding natural gas changeouts, is there's been a very appreciable increase in the cost of conversion that does not appear to be tied to any kind of real inflationary pressures. But again, it's eroded the value of the change out or the oil to gas subsidy.
Yeah, one thing we're hoping to do in this with this increase is hopefully start to monitor that a little bit. It's hard to do where we sit now, and a lot of the details we get as far as the change outs, every change out's different. Somebody might be getting 2 boilers and a whole bunch of copper pipe. And so going through each one and kind of monitoring what the cost is and what it should be is kind of difficult on this end. So we're hoping that we can look over historical averages and see if this increase tracks with and just an increase of available funding versus an increase in cost.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, this has been great. Again, guys, I really appreciate your making yourselves available and this robust discussion. We are at the top of the hour, but we all have a few more minutes. I would open up the floor to questions or comments if there are any.
This is Gary Newman. I've been an energy auditor going back to the 80s, and I ran weatherization program for Tanana Chiefs. The concept of having an energy audit of knowing where your opportunities are seemed to make sense to me. If I was moving into a house and I knew there were things to improve and that there would be a life cycle improvement, it seems to me that's something I would go for. One of the questions I have about the map that you had for the air attainment area, there seems to be 2 areas. One of the areas where there is actually issues of PM 2.5, and then the outlying areas that go all the way out to Goldstream and partly out Chena Hot Springs. Are those 2 areas treated differently in terms of trying to achieve attainment?
I think I can take that question. As far as from the state's perspective, the air quality control zones that the borough defined and that the state adopted and put into the SIP are right up there. And those apply specifically to the alerts called so that we can do curtailment program differently in those different areas. And so curtailment is done differently, knowing that Goldstream has a different airshed than North Pole does. But then, other than curtailment, the regulations that the state has apply equally to all areas outside of curtailment. Does that answer your question, Gary?
Yeah, it does in a way, but it seems like the areas that you've got highlighted that are outside of the areas where you have problems. It seems like it goes a little bit far in terms of requirements, but that's just my perspective. So thank you for the clarification, though.
Gary, I would agree. The area as defined is set in regulation. If we had the flexibility, and we are looking at sort of what we call a split, and whether or not we can take Fairbanks as a whole, including the Goldstream zone, and separate it out on a different sort of timeline and define Fairbanks and North Pole as 2 separate areas, because currently, Fairbanks, when it comes to its design values, is not our controlling monitor, that is North Pole. And so we know that that's sort of the area of most concern at the moment.
Right.
I would
Okay.
expect the EPA has little or no interest in any kind of carve outs that would keep people from leaning on each other. Again, by keeping us all in one big basket,
we've been running a monitor at sort of A Street there for a bit to make this case. And so I'm not going to say there's zero appetite to split it. It's something that we had to prove. And with last year's data, I think we can make a solid case for that.
All right, to just see that. And I had asked a question in the chat and you responded, thank you very much, on the changing out of the catalytic converters. But I don't know that there's any follow through that, says, okay, well, our emissions are going up. Do we know, do we inspect, do we have any ideas of how to monitor that? I don't think that homeowners would necessarily know. In many cases, they may just say, oh, it's plugged up, I'll take it out. and then you've got to making the problem even worse.
It is, it is a sticky situation. We went into this with the intent to try and retain the ability for people to burn wood under regulation, as opposed to going to like a pellet only regulation that they did in Missoula. So we're not, ideally the technology would be bulletproof. It's not. When you have these kinds of solutions and that sort of thing, it comes with sort of the device ownership, and we're not by any means a large army of folks to follow up on these things. We don't necessarily have the resources to focus on it, but you're right in pointing out that catalysts as they foul or homeowners that modify devices can be a source of additional pollution.
Well, I mean, or an educational thing that says,
Yeah,
send out, who's gotten those, or something to say, hey, check it out, and have a resource to be able to help. If you have, I understood you did have some funding for that, so for follow through, but
yeah, and the outreach opportunity is a good point. And I don't know if we've done something like that in the past, but certainly going forward, that things like that are a focus of where we can definitely improve.
that sounds great. Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks a million, everybody. I think we've reached the top of the hour. Again, our friends from Air Quality, thank you so much for, again, your work, your diligence, and trying hard for us. We appreciate it. Again, we want to clean up the air, but also do it in a way that has the least other ancillary negative impacts across the community. And again, we appreciate your efforts. All right. Well, I have nothing further for the day. Again, thanks a lot, everybody. Let me go ahead and shut off the recording.